I think we're seeing certainly, well, I think one version of the barrier is, in today's like indie environment, as an example, people have a creative idea, they begin to run with it, and then they often don't necessarily engage with like the publishing side until much later in the process. And so that's just sort of like the circumstances have made it so the timing is off for that engagement. And then you're kind of reacting to something that's already there instead of being part of the conversation throughout the game development process. On the
Mm,
larger scale, sort of bigger AAA side of the equation, I think it's just again like that the maturation of the game development and game publisher relationship and the shift from how games used to be made to a more modern integrated way of games being made today. And I think we'll continue to see that shift toward the more integrated model. Um, and then with sort of the environment we're in right now in the industry, there are also a number of games that were invested in outside of the traditional publisher relationship that, be it angel investors or VC, et cetera, that were really investing in the creators themselves and the creative idea. But again, allowed that studio to maybe skip some of the engagement that you would get from working with a publisher from the beginning, or at least having internal publishing capabilities at the beginning of the dev cycle.
so essentially, we we think of publishing as a, I don't know, last third of development sort of problem, and because of that, we don't actually get that insight early on, and so it's hard for us to share goals because yeah, by that time, a game dev team, they've established it. Like, this is what I'm trying to build. This is the game, blah, blah, blah. And the publisher just sort of has to accept that or not. And if they say no, then I go to try to find a different publisher. And if you say yes, well, now you're stuck with it. And, if you have good ideas, it's like, it's too late. And so I'll just try to solve the marketing, commercialization, like, how are we going to help this be successful while you're kind of trying to finish the game. And it's not even, almost like we're not even talking past each other. We're just really not communicating a ton.
Right. Or you're doing your best for where you are in the process. And you're exactly right. Like, I think the historic way you would think of like a publisher engaging around a game is like, oh, at vertical slice, they start to work. And like now we know that it's actually part of the whole process.
Okay, so if um, two questions, one I'm going to ask about indie, the other one's going to be about double A or triple A. If you were setting this up, you were leading a team, and you were like, I'm starting an indie team. I have a ton of experience with publishing, so I know how to set this up so it'll be successful from the beginning and not make some of the oversights or whatever mistakes. Often, I think through ignorance that people make around this. What would be the things you'd be thinking about in terms of when do I bring publishing in? How do I bring them in? If again, you're like, I'm spinning up an indie team, but I know at some point I'm going to want to be thinking about publishing because I need to market the game someday.
Yep. I think first and foremost is thinking about what is publishing going to mean for our game development cycle for this game, and like how am I going to do that with or without a publisher. So with fewer sort of publisher relationships or publishing investments happening in the industry, or those turning into more revenue share, less financially like publishers writing checks, that increases the burden on the studio and the developer themselves to begin like understanding and building that relationship with the community. So figuring out a plan for how am I going to resource that? Am I going to find somebody fractionally to help me like launch and run my Steam page and help me with my demo strategy, even sort of at this like MVP version of publishing, like it needs to be accounted for a small team when thinking about bringing a game to market. So I would start with that. And I think um, building that relationship with the community and showing traction also benefits your ability to find a great partner, to find a great publishing partner, or find potentially deals with platforms, et cetera. So I would say build a plan for how you're going to resource the publishing needs, even if you have a small team.
Before we go to the double A, triple A, you just said build a plan for how you're going to resource the publishing needs. Can you just list like what you think of as, hey, these are the major things that are the publishing needs that you need to be aware of? So you mentioned community, you mentioned like beta, like some sort of alpha beta kind of, hey, usually it might be milestone plan or something like that. But like what are those publishing needs? Because again, I think a lot of people just like, oh, I want to make a cool game. It's like, cool. this stuff is not in the book about how game design works or something like that, right? So
Yeah. So you're going to want to announce your game, have a Steam page set up, make sure that you're encouraging anybody who enjoys your game to wishlist the game, to follow your game and make sure that they're engaging with your content. You're going to want to build a demo strategy. You're going to want to have like good assets for your store, hopefully a trailer, and like reasonably polished assets for your Steam page, like give it a really good, solid professional shot, and then have a strategy for how you're going to continue to update and engage that audience. Is what I would consider the MVP of publishing would be your Steam presence and ongoing Steam community management strategy. And then I think to add to that, of course, is what are you going to do in social media? Like, are you building a community outside of that platform? Are you resourced to make sure that you have content to talk to them about and time to engage them? And think of it really as like building not just a community to buy your game, but to help you build that game. So as competition increases in the marketplace, that means there is more demand on your game to solve a unique problem for players. And your opportunity to make sure that you are solving a problem for players is to have dialogue with them, understand, like get their feedback on your game throughout development and, build in partnership with them.
almost want to ask, can you go one more ring out? So if that's MVP and like +1, MVP +1, what's MVP +2 for like publishing? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you're thinking of like festival participation. How am I bringing more people into my community and building awareness outside of like my direct to consumer initiatives? You're thinking of how am I engaging content creators and influencers and people who might like to play my game? Do I have an opportunity to do some ad spend testing and like, oh, this trailer or asset I made seemed like it did pretty well. Like, could you put some money behind it and make it go even further? So I think step one is sort of your direct relationship and community building. And then your higher levels are like building a larger and larger community and funnel to bring them in.
Okay, so let's switch from indie to AA, AAA. Now you're running a studio that's looking for, maybe you've been funded independently, or maybe you're looking for a publisher to fund or something like, but you need a lot of money. You're trying to do something pretty big. How are you relating to publishing? How's that different from the indie side or not?
Yeah, I think the same basics hold up. Like you're going to want to be cognizant of building a community and show traction with that community. Hopefully you are better positioned that as you're building your production plan, you are building in budget for bringing that game to market and have a strong sense of sort of what those needs are, even at a high level. And then having that understanding of sort of that overall life cycle of launching a demo and engaging a community and sort of that it's not just it's no longer I announce a game, I get some press to cover it, and then I get to launch it. Like it's a far more engaged and complex go-to-market strategy. I think even being able to speak to that in the language of publishers, like showing that you understand sort of the weight that is expected for the publisher to carry, I think goes a long way. And showing, your understanding of what's needed to build a true like market and community for your game, and show that you're there to be a collaborative partner in finding this audience in a way that, to our previous conversation of like that being adversarial, I think having an understanding of how much work that goes into that piece, like builds space for collaboration.
But the thing that just jumped to mind for me was this idea of, while game development has gotten more expensive, and you mentioned earlier, like salaries went up, I think time to ship went up and size of team went up, and all three of those combined is just like it's this sort of significantly higher expense than you would have thought. If you lead teams in game or software development and you're tired of wasteful and unreliable estimation, I've built an online course just for you. It's called Advanced Estimation for Game and Software Development, and it's a self-paced course with over 15 hours of content, real-world examples, and tools you can start using right away. Estimation doesn't have to be a morale-draining mess. Planning doesn't have to feel unrealistic and contrived. you can do better, and this course will help. Early access is now open with lifetime access and a big launch discount, but there's limited seats at this price point. Check it out at this URL or in the show notes below.